All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke with the research team at Skift. We have Jared Ween, our senior analyst on the research team, and also Dennis Shaw, executive editor at Skift, covering the space for 20 years. How you doing, guys?
Great. That's Luke Bujarski, right?
Bujarski, that's me. That's my name. Don't wear it out. But let's get to the topic. We're going to be talking about Google's positioning in the global travel ecosystem. Wow, that's some heavy stuff. But we're gonna try to lighten it up a little bit. We have some free-form conversation that we're gonna have about it. But first, we're gonna just run through some rather impressive slides that we've put together just to kind of put things into context. So Skift, we are the best and biggest and greatest business intelligence platform in the travel industry. Check us out at skift.com and also research.skift.com for all of your travel intelligence needs. So we're going to talk about Google, the vast, complex reach in the travel industry. We're going to talk consolidation. We're going to look at some survey results from our Skift audience. We're going to look at what travel means for Google and what Google means for the travel industry. So let's thinking about Google's vast and complex reach in travel. So traditional advertising on Google, that is Google's bread and butter when it comes to working with the big OTAs, the big online travel groups. But they want to enter into the space a little bit in a different way as well with their hotel ads, which ultimately amounts to a meta search model that some of the bigger brands already incorporate. Kayak, Trivago, let's not forget TripAdvisor with their instant booking platform, and the meta search that they do there. But it's a bit of an incestuous relationship where Priceline and Expedia's of the world are also basically have their own meta search brands that are also using Google hotel ads. So, end of the day, Google is just, the advertising platform that travel uses. And Jared is going to talk a little bit about the numbers here in a little bit. Everybody wants hotels, travel industry. And when it comes to the money, hotels is where the money is. At least that's where most people will tell you where the money is. But Google's reach into the hotel industry is really, it's a bidding game. A lot of the big OTAs are clearly going to win out when it comes to just kind of the generic searches for, let's say, hotels in London. But we still see an opportunity for some of the smaller hotels to play the Google ads game on more custom searches, like, let's say, luxury hotels in Midtown, for example. So Dennis, what's going on? What's good with Google Flights?
Well, Google Flights is definitely making gains. It's getting much more aggressive in the U.S. and seems to be taking market share from all of its competitors, including Kayak, Skyscanner, and Momondo. I also just know anecdotally from talking to the CEOs of Kayak and Momondo, for example, that they're feeling the impact. Google Trends data shows that the term Google Flights, in terms of search interest in the U.S., rose 22 points in January 2017 compared to just 12 points for those three competitors combined. And Google is getting much more aggressive in terms of they're now intercepting airline trademark terms so that if you search for United flights to Los Angeles, the Google Flights widget is going to spill out there with fares from United. It seems like it's very effective and will ramp things up for them. In terms of consolidation in travel, there's a lot going on. Ctrip acquired Skyscanner. Last week, Priceline acquired Momondo for Kayak. Airbnb's thinking about going into flights. They're making some of their own vacation rental acquisitions. Google is a factor in all this. People see Google coming on strong, and they're all trying to assemble the puzzle pieces.
Right, that makes total sense. So, thinking about Google, clearly a digital player. Travel has a very kind of tenuous relationship with online. Everything that happens in travel these days is online, but it hasn't been that way for very long. We just did our definitive oral history on online travel that Dennis wrote. So there's still a lot going on in digital. We wanted to get a sense of how the travel industry is dealing with that. So we launched our 2016 Digital Transformation Survey, mostly hotel respondents. We had some interesting things come out of that, some interesting insights coming out of that survey. We saw that there's still first of all, there's still a big chunk of players in the travel industry that are ultimately concerned about what they're doing with their digital strategies. Over a third said that they were behind in their digital strategies. So that pressure is coming from two directions. It's either they're feeling a pinch in terms of budgets, or they're feeling a pinch in terms of talent and their ability to source the appropriate talent in terms of tech, compared to some of the big guys, not just Google, but also the Expedias and Pricelines of the world that are kind of sucking up all that digital talent. Not to mention the fact that there's this huge transition that's happened over the last 5 years of travel moving into mobile. And we see that a big portion of the travel industry still doesn't consider themselves a mobile first organization. And that might make sense if we think about the bookings that are still happening on desktop, but nevertheless, things, the numbers are fairly stark here. And you think about that nearly half of the travel providers out there are still receiving less than 20% of their traffic from mobile. And so there's going to be a lot of investments that are going to have to take place, and there are taking steps. Digital analytics, front-end consumer experience, the big buzzwords, data science, big data are the things that companies are kind of prioritizing. So that's the context of Google. Let's jump into some of the numbers with Jared.
Thanks, Luke. So the chart below would show that digital advertising and travel in 2015 for the big four OTAs, Priceline, Expedia, TripAdvisor, and Ctrip, was right around $6 billion. One thing to note on these numbers, the advertising online number themselves, especially outside of Priceline, is not specifically in the financials. So we back into this stripping out things that are not direct expenses, personnel cost, and then take about a 90% of total advertising to get to digital. So looking at the entire travel ecosystem, we believe that the big four OTAs have roughly 40 to 60% market share of how much gets spent, which would imply that in 2015, there's about $12 billion that was spent on digital advertising. Just for frame of reference, that would be comparable to how much Google and Facebook's combined global ad share is. For Google, last year, 2015, based on our channel checks, 70 to 90% was the typical range that gets spent on Google within the digital travel spend. So at 80%, you get to $10 billion. As we're halfway through earnings season, the trend continues with 20 to 25% growth. So we see 2016 at $12 billion on Google, and 2017 continuing to grow and hitting $14 billion. Facebook is an area where there's been a lot of interest, and we'll have a report coming out shortly, where right now they're small at about a couple percentage market share. But we see the intent at the hotels, we see the intent at the OTAs and the metas, and Facebook itself launching dynamic travel ads where everyone wants to grow this pie. And we believe the big driving factor is the suppliers want to move to being less reliant on Google. And Facebook sees a very important market within the travel ecosystem. So for dynamic travel ads, they let the hotels and OTAs retarget customers. So they may not have the intent that Google has, but the ability to track consumers across devices will be quite important. And we see this growing over time and potentially hitting 10% in the coming years. So for Google Hotel Ads, it's an interesting dynamic where the big OTAs and meta search continue to dominate AdWords. So if you do a hotel search for hotels in London, you'll see Expedia, Trivago, and TripAdvisor at the top. And this is not surprising, as that is where it takes a huge marketing budget to compete. Further down the screen is the new hotel ads, which is the meta search model for Google. And when you look there, technically the front page is organic. So Corinthia, London, Marriott Hotel, they don't actually pay to be listed there. But when you click through the London Marriott Hotel, Marriott did pay to be that $362 listing you see there, and as did Expedia and Booking.com. So what this means is within that model on Google, you may not pay on the first part, but to generate any sort of booking, you're going to have to pay the same way you would for AdWords. And so that's why you'll see on the listing here, Marriott is there, but if you go to smaller boutique hotels, they tend to be less prevalent. The next set of slides will provide you guys, but the main takeaway is that CPA is the commission-based model where boutique hotels can lower their risk and ensure that they're only paying 10 to 15% or higher, depending on the model, for a booking. So the drawback is you may pay anywhere to 20% cost, but you're certain that you're only paying when you get a booking. So you're paying for actual revenue. CPC, you're paying for the click. So this is pure marketing. The negative is if you're a small boutique and you start spending a lot on CPC, you may not get any bookings out of it. The positive is if you're a Booking.com and you dominate the industry, you can generate traffic and create bookings and convert, and you effectively could wind up with, say, a 5-6% cost per acquisition. The next slides, again, we'll just leave you for some of the mechanics behind the bidding process. And then we'll turn to Dennis to talk about how Google Hotel Ads has been a bit slower out of the gate than flights.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, from what we can tell, Google Hotel Ads, which just shows up in search if you search for Marriott Hotel in New York City or just hotels in Los Angeles, is underperforming Google Hotel Finder, which was sunset in 2015, which was a destination site in and of itself. And it's also underperforming Google Flights. And it appears as though they sunset Google Hotel Finder because that was more directly competitive with the OTAs, which are Google's largest advertiser in Google Hotel Ads. In the meantime, Google has been focused on some of the plumbing of Google Hotel Ads. It's integrated the hotel ads into Google Maps, making it sort of a mini meta site on its own. Meanwhile, we feel strongly that Google is not becoming an OTA. Google may be taking steps to get closer to the customer through TripAdvisor like instant booking, although it's going fairly slowly. But, becoming an OTA is hard. Google doesn't have the expertise. They would have to start dealing with flight cancellations and rebooking customers, and they would be alienating their largest advertisers. Google, as we said, probably generated $12 billion in ad revenue in 2016. That compares to Expedia, whose total revenue was $8.8 billion. So by those numbers, Google's travel ad business is already 1.5 times larger than Expedia. Why alienate your largest customers by becoming an OTA?
All right, I think that's a really good place to kind of end our more formal presentation discussion about what the economics of Google. I think when we talk about Google, clearly we're looking at the bigger picture when it comes to overall consolidation in the industry. And Dennis, you had a really good point here when saying that Google is not becoming an OTA. Can you give us a little bit of context around what's happening outside of the Google ecosystem in terms of the travel space? Clearly, we've seen a lot happening in the space of Meta, right? Can you talk a little bit about some of the more recent activity in terms of acquisitions and other interesting things that have been happening that might relate to where Google is going in their travel ambitions?
Yeah.
So just bigger picture stuff, like, with the Skyscanner and then the Momondo acquisitions kind of back to back. What's that all about?
Yeah, Luke, the C-Trip acquisition of Skyscanner seems to have shaken a lot of people up. It was a big deal. C-Trip in China, which has huge global acquisitions, is now talking about integrating Skyscanner into its search beginning next year. And that's really had that's really reverberated, I think, throughout the travel industry. You saw in response that, partially in response that Priceline acquired Momondo, to get stronger in Europe. That, of course, is flight related. It won't help Kayak and Priceline compete with Trivago, which is hotel only. But all of that, I think, is spurred by the Ctrip Skyscanner acquisition, fear of Google as Google makes incremental gains, and now Airbnb is talking about getting into flights. We'll see if they do that, if they're successful. It looks like Airbnb launched tours and activities a few months ago, and that doesn't seem like it's really picking up a lot of steam. Some of this stuff is a lot harder than it looks.
Right. So it kind of seems like there are two very, very different camps in terms of travel and where it's all going. There's the one idea that travel as a commodity, when we think about airline search and hotel search, and ultimately that's where it all ends. But there are these other brands like Airbnb and TripAdvisor that are really trying to integrate the whole experience in terms of not only just when you get there, but also the full life cycle of the travel experience in terms of in-destination, including activities and all that other stuff. But if Google wanted to, though, they could do all that stuff, right? And just think about all the vast amounts of resources they have.
Yeah, Google is all over the place now. They have their Trips app, which mines your Gmail and posts all your past flights, all your upcoming flights. It enables you to pull together an itinerary of things to do for if you have 48 hours in Montreal or wherever. You have Google Home. You have the Pixel phones now, where you can ask, is my flight late? What about my past flights? Artificial intelligence might revolutionize the whole thing, and look at all the data and the technical prowess that Google has to make that work. It's interesting when you mention the dichotomy between companies that are looking that are focusing on the whole travel experience versus the ones that, like MetaSearch, that's focusing on price. Because I read a survey recently, it was put out by HomeAway, which said that millennials don't really value the local experience, that's one of the last things on their priority list. So that's kind of funny, given all the rhetoric that we're hearing about, how local, is the whole enchilada.
Okay, but Google, like you mentioned, has maps. It has, it's built into the whole ecosystem. Half of the world's population has Android phones. I don't know what specifically those numbers are, but they own the hardware, they own the software. So it seems like Google's encroachment into travel is really kind of inevitable. They're already there, obviously. How far they're gonna go will probably depend on companies like Facebook, right, as a viable alternative. Jared, any thoughts there in terms of?
Yeah, thanks. Facebook is definitely growing, and we see the intent from the online travel companies, from the hotels, to make this a more meaningful line item. The issue is that there's not the same commercial intent as there is with Google. So Google, you're saying, find me a hotel for this date in this location. It's going to give you exactly what you want. For Facebook, it's more aspirational and visual, where it's kind of a hybrid between TV and Google. But what's interesting, and where I think it's going to take some nice share from not Google, but the rest of the industry, is the ability for a Kayak to see you were doing a flight search for a hotel to London, and then to go have that person's Facebook ID in Kayak, and then put an ad on Facebook for Kayak for a hotel. To be able to do that across devices, I think will help them win new business, and it's something that we haven't seen before. And again, for them, the difference is that it's ID based instead of cookies.
Jared, it's funny. In the third quarter, the CEO of Expedia said he wanted to get Facebook and other social platforms to Google-like levels. I don't see that happening. I don't think it has that potential. My kids quit Facebook about 3 years ago. It's only the old fogies who are still on Facebook. And Facebook is talking about, its ad load already being saturated in the news feed. How much potential does Facebook really have as an advertising platform where, it's a social platform? So as you're really going to turn off all the users if you over advertise on Facebook.
And you think about, though, just thinking about all the different functionalities that Facebook is implementing into its platform, it's almost become, I get the sense that clearly their interest is to keep you on that platform as long as possible. They want to consume all of your time on your mobile phone in Facebook. So they want to keep you there as long as possible. They're building out search capabilities, shopping, browsers. They own the traffic, messaging, not to mention messaging, right? So they own the traffic. They have they have the audience. Is it just a matter of putting that option to book in front of them?
Well, I guess just turning back to Dennis's point on the ad load, one thing that's important is when they say the ad load is saturated, it's the amount of ads. Say you had 100 posts on your wall. It used to be 1, 2, 3% were advertisements. We've hit about they've never quantified this, but just doing our own tests, it's about 10 to 15% of how much ads per post. But the trend and why there's room for Facebook to grow is that the cost per ad continues to grow. So as engagement increases, like in the US, it's pretty, the way we can look at engagement is how many monthly active users are daily active users. And right now, globally, there's about 1.2, I believe, billion daily active users and 1.8 or so billion monthly active users. And despite all this growth in the US, about 3/4 of the monthly active users are daily. And what we're seeing is that advertisers are paying more each year for those ads. So I agree that the supply is saturated, so it limits how much growth you can get from supply. But the way it will work is that the travel industry, which if it works out and they see that they're getting traction on the retargeting, on conversion, or even for brand awareness versus TV, they will pay more to retarget somebody where you have a small subset of the population than, let's just say, a consumer apparel company or a coffee shop who, the way it works right now is you bid on Facebook, and part of the bidding process is how many people you're trying to target. And then the other part is based on who wins, based on the likeliness of success. So it's kind of a positive feedback loop for customers bidding, for advertisers bidding. The more likely your ads are to win, the more likely your ads are to sell, the more likely you are to win the bid. And for Facebook, that means they'll have happier customers on that bid. And because it's cost per action or cost per whatever, if the advertisers lose that little subset of the population, they just turn around and they bid somewhere else.
Speaking of mobile and messaging, I thought one thing that was really interesting and it relates to Google, of course, in the Skift survey, was it the percentage of companies that saw themselves as mobile first versus those that don't. Was it 20% said they weren't mobile first? And you compare that with, Booking.com now says it's getting 50% of its bookings over mobile. So it seems like it's really creating in the travel industry the haves and the have-nots among companies, those that are really good at mobile and those that aren't. And then you think of Google's potential in mobile, it's all-encompassing.
And I would almost say, though, at the expense of audiences that are on desktop, I feel like that the mobile first approach is clearly something that's very important for travel brands, but I think it's also, you can't ignore the fact that people are still using desktop to book travel. So from personal experience, I see that a lot of kind of user experience is being lost, even on the part of Google when it comes to just user experience on, there's the Internet Explorer or Chrome. It's almost becoming to where the mobile experience is better than the desktop experience by far. So at what cost are we looking at in terms of user experience for, the likes of, the bigger brands, but also Google when optimizing for, on a kind of a mobile first strategy, right? So something to think about.
And one thing that I think is really interesting when you have this mobile first world, so when you first look at from Google's perspective and you look at their results, a couple of years back, I think it was 2 years ago, everyone was freaking out that cost per click or CPC was coming down because everyone was going to mobile. And what happened was kind of a delayed reaction where the volume from mobile didn't offset right away the decline in CPC. But then there was a dramatic upswing where the volume done on mobile drastically exceeds desktop and CPC is stabilizing. So for Google...
So crisis averted?
Right. So that's why for Google, you're seeing, 25% constant currency revenue growth at $90 billion in revenue, which is unheard of. For the OTAs, the benefit is in a mobile first world, it's much harder to generate conversions. So you need to be a company like Booking.com or Expedia to be able to win market share. And, we're seeing TripAdvisor move to their instant booking model, and they're seeing some headwinds on mobile. And, they're a very large company, and they're having challenges. So what it means is you have these smaller niche meta search sites or niche OTAs or boutique hotels. And to try to win share from a Booking.com becomes increasingly more difficult.
I talk to hoteliers and they say, look, if I can just give 15% of my revenues to Booking.com and they can take care of all of my distribution, sales and distribution woes, then that's fine. A lot of, this talk about these booking wars a lot of times is overblown.
You're giving up total control to another company, which that's tough.
True. But, if you think about obviously the competition is there. If you think about Google in the context of, TripAdvisor and Expedia, I think, the suppliers do have options. So, whether or not we're going to be seeing a kind of race to the bottom when it comes to commissions, I think that the pressures on, the kind of the traditional players, whether it's Expedia or Priceline, to kind of contain the costs. So, Google, is this a good or a bad thing? Well, clearly a competitor for Expedia or Priceline, but when we think about the hotelier, good or bad, I think.
Well, it's another option,
right,
so
exactly.
It's not just Kayak or Booking.com or Expedia. There's or TripAdvisor. There's another cowboy in town.
What's interesting is that on Google and TripAdvisor, even there, for meta search, essentially, or whatever we're going to call it, instant booking or meta search, there's still 10 to 15% commission fees, which is lower than what a lot of the boutiques might pay the OTAs, but it's still, still pretty high. So it's just something to see how that plays out, where, moving to Google or Trip or, it may incrementally help, but we're also seeing a case where, and Expedia's talked about this, where they're seeing more boutique hotels take share from the larger chains within the OTA platform. So that goes back to Luke's point where, let's say you're a boutique hotel and you don't have an advertising team, you don't have a marketing team, you don't have people on the ground, that 20% could be a fantastic investment. But if you're Hilton and you have massive operations around the globe and you could have sold that with your people and the marketing office you have, that 20% you're looking at as a loss.
I just wanted to mention one other topic before we wrap up. And, we talked about niche metas and TripAdvisor, and we're talking about consolidation. Mm-hmm. So who do you guys think is the next piece to fall in terms of mergers and acquisitions?
Wow. Well, just kind of looking at the landscape, it doesn't seem like there's a lot left out there. TripAdvisor is always coming up as the next kind of target. There's question on whether or not there's a suitable buyer for TripAdvisor. But in terms of availability and what's out there, that's one of the big fish that's swimming around out there. Meta continues to be hot. There's some interesting players out there. Tripping.com that focuses on the vacation rental market. It's still kind of early stages for them, but they recently secured additional funding, and clearly that's an acquisition play there.
Clearly? I don't know if it's an acquisition play. I mean, Tripping, they don't have the audience yet, and meta search itself is so difficult. And meta search in vacation rentals where none of the inventory is uniform, that's,
Well, more the reason for the meta search, right?
Yeah.
Because of the inventory. You have all these little niche markets. You think about, vacation rentals in Hawaii or vacation rentals in Vancouver. So many of these kind of very unique content-oriented marketplaces.
So how do you
popping up.
compare them on price, though? How do you compare one to, which is the deal? Because people who go to MetaSearch are super price conscious. An $8 difference in the room night is going to sway their decision. So comparing them, that's tough.
But if you think about Airbnb's interest in luxury retreats, I think that that's a sign that Airbnb is having a tough time actually growing its inventory, even in light of the strong global branding that it has as a lifestyle brand. There's, I think, a lot of inventory out there in the vacation rental space that really isn't marketed properly. So, let's see what happens. But I think it's definitely an interesting space, and I'm sure that the big players, whether it's Kayak or Priceline or Expedia, they're certainly interested in incorporating a lot of that inventory into their meta search platforms. What technology can Tripping offer in terms of all the networking that it's already done, in terms of that fragmented supplier base? I think it could be an interesting proposition for them.
I think there's a lot of also regional meta search players out there that might be there for the taking. Like there's Wago, in Southeast Asia. Duhop, I don't know how to pronounce it, in Iceland, is doing a lot of work in Russia with the search engine there, Yandex. So some of those players, some of those companies are up for grabs, but none of those are really game changing. The one company that would be game changing would be TripAdvisor, but now that
I know Jared's got some opinions about TripAdvisor.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think strategically it makes a lot of sense for a Priceline, for even a Google. But when I look at, people have been talking about TripAdvisor at $110 a couple of years ago being a takeout target. It's now $52, so it's down 50%. Does Stephen Kaufer want to sell his company at this price? I highly doubt it. He's committed to the instant booking model.
Yeah, if somebody comes in and offers $70 a share, it's his fiduciary duty to entertain that.
Right. Then the question goes, I don't think someone would pay $10 billion here.
Why? It's a bargain. Assuming that they're going to straighten themselves out with instant booking, it's a bargain price for TripAdvisor. They're, in addition to Google, they are one of the must-have places to advertise, for hotels, for example.
If we think about Skyscanner, and what did they fetch?
1.7 billion. Yeah.
1.7 billion. Okay. Well, TripAdvisor has been around for quite a bit longer.
It's the largest travel site in the world in terms of traffic. So they have the traffic, they have the
they have the monetization tools right. They've taken some big hits on implementing the instant booking model. Clearly, they're working on it. Strong brand. I think either way, whether or not they get scooped up, I can see how TripAdvisor can continue to be competitive. But again, there's the big looming question: is Google, right? And how it's all gonna play out, particularly in the user-generated content space. I think TripAdvisor a year ago may have had some competitive advantage there, a year or two ago, in terms of what they offer. But you also see companies like Google stepping up the pace in terms of reviews and what's available to the customer, particularly through maps.
One of TripAdvisor's problems is that it doesn't have any experience in being an OTA, and they're finding, they were once owned by an OTA, Expedia, but they didn't get any expertise in being an OTA. So the natural acquirer would be the Priceline Group, which I think could really help TripAdvisor in terms of OTA experience and international expansion and its language capabilities, which are tremendous, that Booking.com has. But, the Priceline Group now has Kayak. It now has Momondo. Is it going to acquire another meta-search company?
I also wonder if they try to, how much anti-competitive, like which we always forget which commission would be for
the FTC or the DOJ.
Right. What would they have to say if all of a sudden Priceline now owns basically? I mean, you can point that Google is the the big competitor and they're going to metasearch, but I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't speculate. But it would definitely be a concern. I don't know what you guys have thoughts on anti-competition.
I mean, we're living in the Trump era. I don't know what that means, but anything goes these days. Clearly there's huge, big moves in consolidation in the space. Some of the Skyscanner really didn't hit any sort of hurdles. TripAdvisor clearly has a different stake in the game. They're the big brand. The tentacles reaching throughout not only accommodations, but they're also into flights and in restaurant business and what they're doing on the destination side. So you can see how a Google acquisition, or just hypothetically speaking, of course, could pose some regulatory issues there.
And as I tweeted the other day, Google acquiring TripAdvisor would be like the Hatfields and the McCoys going out partying together on Saturday night, because there has been a lot of animosity between the two companies. Google was basically taking TripAdvisor's user reviews without their permission, and Google has shut out the competition in terms of organic search. The only way you can get your results up there on the first page of Google is to pay for it.
And it's not like Google needs the money anyway, right? I mean, in terms of Google's the way that they operate, is clearly everything falls under the Google brand. They're not they want Google reviews, they want Google Maps, they don't want TripAdvisor reviews polluting their brand, clearly. So on the technology side, what does TripAdvisor ultimately offer a Google? I don't think Google is going to be a play, but there could be some companies coming out from left field. Who knows? Jared and I discussed this earlier, and some big players in China still active in the space, wanting to own a baseball team, basically, right?
Right. Yeah, and we've seen that in the theme park industry, where Disney went to China. And one of the billionaires in China, right around the same time, said, I'm going to open up $17 billion worth of theme parks. So whether it's C-Trip or just a private equity-ish type company, as Luke said, coming out of left field, that could be an area where they want to get into outbound travel from China. And TripAdvisor is a built-in fantastic brand with tons of loyalty. So the price they would pay, whether it's too high of a multiple, wouldn't matter, because it's not like Priceline or Expedia is answering to shareholders that they just spent 15 times revenue or something on the company. Where if it's a Chinese private equity company or the equivalent, they could do whatever they want.
In other words, TripAdvisor, who is going to sweep you off your feet?
Airbnb? Be all that you can be?
They plan on throwing money around, so you never know.
Well, this is going to be the big one, right? The little luxury retreats is going to be their biggest acquisition yet, right? Looking at like 300 million or so.
Right.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much. Well, this has been a great conversation. Tune in next time for the online travel talk show. The online travel wrap. That is Skift. Thanks so much.